The final verdict felt less like a judgment and more like the ceiling of a tomb. I stood in the center of the Duke's grand hall, the cold marble floor leaching warmth from the soles of my thin slippers. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax and the silent, hungry stares of the court. My father, Duke Valerius, sat on his carved oak throne, his face a mask of weary disappointment, a look he had perfected over my 19 years of life. Beside him, my stepmother, Duchess Isolde, dabbed at a perfectly dry eye with a lace handkerchief, her expression one of tragic, feigned sympathy. But all my attention was on my stepsister, Serafina. She was the final witness. She stood before the assembly, a vision in silks the color of a summer sky, her golden hair catching the light from the high arched windows. A single perfect tear traced a path down her flawless cheek as she pointed a trembling finger at me. "I saw her," she whispered, her voice breaking with practiced sorrow. "I saw Ilara down by the riverbank the night before the blight appeared. She was chanting dark words, I'm sure of it. She held a dead raven, and when she threw it in the water, the river, it seemed to curdle." Lies, all of it. A poisonous tapestry woven from jealousy and spite. The court gasped as one. My father's jaw tightened. He didn't want to believe in witchcraft, not because he thought me innocent, but because it was an embarrassment to his noble house, a scandal. "She has always been strange," Isolde added, her voice dripping with concern that was sharper than any blade. "Her obsession with the dirt, her muttering to plants. We tried to guide her, of course. We tried to make her a proper lady. But this darkness, it was always inside her." They had painted the perfect picture for my father, a masterpiece of betrayal. The duchy's crops were failing, the people were growing restless, and they had handed him a scapegoat on a silver platter. Me, his strange, quiet daughter, the one who preferred the company of greenhouses to the suffocating politics of the court. The witch. "Ilara of House Valerius," my father's voice boomed, devoid of any paternal warmth. It was the voice of a ruler excising a tumor from his lands. "For the crime of witchcraft, for bringing blight and famine upon this duchy, you are hereby stripped of your name and title. You are exiled. You will be taken to the Cinderwood and left to the judgment of the gods." Another collective gasp. The Cinderwood was a death sentence. A vast expanse of ashen soil and petrified trees on the furthest border of the duchy. A place where nothing grew, where legends said the very ground was cursed. They were not just disowning me, they were condemning me to a slow, lonely death from starvation and exposure. Serafina met my gaze across the hall, and for a fleeting moment, her mask of sorrow slipped. I saw the pure, undiluted triumph in her eyes. She had won. She had finally gotten rid of the sister she'd always seen as a rival, a weed in her perfectly cultivated garden of a life. Two guards, their faces grim, seized my arms. Their grip was rough, bruising. I didn't struggle. I held my head high as they dragged me from the hall, my bare feet stumbling on the cold stone. As they pushed me through the heavy doors, I felt a faint warmth against my thigh, a tiny prickle of life from within the pocket of my simple dress. It was a seed, a single moon petal seed I had tucked away that morning, hoping to plant it in a hidden corner of the garden. In the darkness of my pocket, shielded from the hateful glares of my family, I felt the impossible happen. A tiny, vibrant green sprout, filled with a defiant energy that mirrored my own silent fury, pushed through the seed's tough casing. I curled my fingers around it, the nascent life a secret promise against my palm. They thought they were sending a witch to her grave. They had no idea they were sending a force of nature to her crucible. The journey to the Cinderwood was a blur of jolting wagon wheels and the guards' contemptuous silence. My mind, however, was painfully clear, replaying the bleak tapestry of my life, each thread a memory of cruelty and neglect. My own mother had been like me. She didn't call it witchcraft. She called it the song of the earth. She had a way with living things, an intuitive understanding of the land that felt like magic to others. She could coax blossoms from the most stubborn soil, and her herbal remedies were more effective than any physician's poultice. She was beloved by the common folk, but her quiet power had made the nobility, including my father, deeply uncomfortable. She died when I was 6, a sudden fever that came and went in a single night, leaving me with only fragmented memories of her warm hands and the scent of lavender and rich soil. Duke Valerius remarried within the year. Duchess Isolde swept into our lives like a winter storm, bringing with her a daughter, Serafina, who was only a year older than me. From the very beginning, they saw my inheritance from my mother not as a gift, but as a stain. My affinity for the gardens became my obsession with dirt. My quiet, observant nature was twisted into sullen strangeness. I was the living, breathing reminder of the first Duchess, the one whose memory Isolde was determined to erase. The abuse was a slow, steady erosion of my spirit. It was in the way Isolde would praise Serafina's clumsy embroidery while calling my intricate stitching uninspired. It was in the way Serafina would accidentally spill ink over my studies, then weep to our father about how I had shouted at her for a simple mistake. They worked in tandem, a perfectly synchronized pair of predators. They broke my mother's treasured porcelain music box and blamed a clumsy maid. They uprooted the rare night-blooming jasmine I had spent months cultivating from a single cutting my mother had left me, claiming it was a noxious weed. My father, consumed with politics and maintaining his status, was willfully blind. He saw in Serafina the perfect daughter, beautiful, charming, and socially adept. He saw me as a problem, a difficult, withdrawn child who was an obstacle to the family's pristine image. When I tried to tell him about their cruelty, he would sigh with that signature weariness. "Alara, you must learn to get along with your new mother and sister. Your jealousy is unbecoming." Jealousy. They had everything. The fine clothes, the tutors, the praise, the love of a father. All I had was a small hidden corner of the castle gardens and the secrets my mother had whispered to me about the song of the earth. In that hidden sanctuary, I practiced. I learned to feel the life force in the seeds I held, to sense the thirst of a plant's roots, to understand the subtle shifts in the soil. My power grew beyond simple gardening. I discovered I could feel the flow of water underground, sense impurities, and even encourage stone to shift, ever so slightly, with a deep, focused hum. It was my only solace, a secret world they couldn't touch. The blight that condemned me was the ultimate act of their coordinated cruelty. For months, the duchy's crops had been withering. The wheat grew thin and black with rot. The vegetables turned to mush in the ground. Panic began to spread. I had spent weeks walking the fields in secret, humming the song, trying to understand the sickness in the land. I finally found its source near the river that fed the duchy's irrigation channels. It was a creeping, violet-hued fungus, clinging to the river stones and poisoning the water. I recognized it from one of my mother's old botany journals. She had written of a specific type of silver moss that, when introduced to a water source, would naturally counteract the fungus and purify the water within a moon's cycle. I was naive. I was desperate. I thought perhaps this was my chance to finally prove my worth, to use my gift to save us all. I drew up charts, gathered samples, and presented my findings and my proposed solution to my father in his study. He listened with a flicker of interest, the first he had shown me in years. But Isolde and Serafina were there. As I spoke, I saw Serafina's eyes widen, not with hope, but with a sudden, sharp glint of predatory opportunity. "Father," she'd said, her voice soft and laced with alarm after I had finished. "Don't you see? How could she possibly know all this? The source of the blight, this magical cure? It's because she is the cause." Isolde picked up the thread without missing a beat. "Valerius, my love, think. The girl has always communed with dark things. She offers a solution only a witch would know, a problem only a witch would create. She seeks to make herself a hero by holding the entire duchy hostage to her unnatural arts." It was brilliant in its wickedness. They turned my knowledge into proof of my guilt. My attempt to save my home became the very weapon they used to cast me out. They bribed a few terrified farmhands, men whose families were starving, to corroborate Serafina's story of my riverside ritual. My father, facing widespread panic and given a simple, convenient answer, chose the path of least resistance. He chose to sacrifice his daughter to save his reputation. The wagon lurched to a final, jarring stop. The rear gate opened, flooding my eyes with a bleak gray light. "End of the line, witch," one of the guards grunted, cutting the ropes that bound my wrists. He shoved a canvas sack into my hands. Inside was a loaf of stale bread, a half-empty water skin, and nothing else. I stumbled out onto the ground. The air was different here. It was thin and acrid, smelling of old ash and decay. Before me stretched the Cinderwood. It was worse than the stories. The ground was a carpet of fine gray dust, as if a great fire had burned here for a century and only just gone out. The trees were skeletal, petrified things, their blackened branches clawing at a perpetually overcast sky. There was no birdsong, no buzz of insects, only a profound and unnerving silence. This was a place where life itself had died. The guards didn't linger. They climbed back onto the wagon, the horses stamping nervously, eager to be away. As they turned to leave, the guard who had shoved me spat on the ground. "May the gods have mercy on your soul, though I doubt they're listening out here." And then they were gone, their wagon a dwindling speck on the horizon, leaving me utterly and completely alone in a dead world. A wave of despair so profound it was physical washed over me, making my knees buckle. I sank into the gray dust, the silence pressing in. They had won. My family had successfully erased me. I would die here and no one would ever know or care. My body would turn to dust just like everything else in this forsaken land. I wept. I cried for my mother, for the life I could have had, for the searing betrayal of a father who was supposed to protect me. I cried until my throat was raw and my eyes were dry. As I sat there, a hollowed-out shell of a girl, my hand instinctively went to my pocket. I drew out the moon petal seed. The sprout had grown even in the short time since my sentencing. It was a vibrant sliver of green, its tiny leaves unfurled, as if reaching for a sun that wasn't there. In this vast landscape of death, it was the only living thing I could see. I felt its energy, a stubborn, tenacious pulse that refused to be extinguished. It was a life force that resonated with the power humming in my own veins. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The despair began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard ember of rage. This power, this song of the earth they called witchcraft, was not a curse. It was my birthright. It was the one part of me they had never been able to touch, to poison, or to steal. They thought they had cast me into a tomb, but they had made a fatal error. They had exiled me with the very key to my survival, the one tool that could turn this graveyard into a garden. I would not die here. I would not give Isolde and Serafina the satisfaction. A new plan began to form in my mind, not of vengeance in the way they would understand it, not of poison or daggers, but of creation. My revenge would not be to destroy their world, but to build a new one from the ashes of this one. I would raise a kingdom in this wasteland so beautiful and so prosperous that their dying duchy would look like a beggar's hovel by comparison. I would build a life so full of light and joy that it would cast a shadow over their miserable, scheming existence. They wanted to erase me. I would become so immense that I would be impossible to ignore. My fingers tightened around the little sprout. I stood up, my back straight, and looked out over the endless gray. The silence no longer felt like an absence. It felt like a blank page. "All right, little one," I whispered to the sprout, my voice raspy but firm. "Let's get to work." My first task was survival. The stale bread and murky water they'd given me wouldn't last long. I needed to find a source of clean water, the very foundation of life. Closing my eyes, I silenced the grief and anger in my mind and listened. I pushed my senses down, past the ashen topsoil, past the compacted dead earth, and listened for the song. It was faint, a barely there hum, but it was present. A weak, sluggish melody deep beneath the ground. Water. I followed the feeling for what felt like miles, my hope dwindling with every step through the monotonous gray landscape. Finally, I came to a shallow basin, a depression in the earth where the dust was slightly darker, damper. At its center was a pool of stagnant black sludge, thick and foul-smelling. But beneath it, the song was stronger. This was it. Kneeling at the edge, I placed my palms on the cool, damp ground. I began to hum, a low, resonant note that my mother had taught me, the frequency of purification. I poured my energy into the earth, focusing on the choked spring below. I imagined the sludge dissolving, the blockages crumbling, the fresh water being freed from its prison. The ground beneath my hands vibrated. Slowly, miraculously, the black sludge began to recede, sinking back into the earth as if being drawn away by an invisible tide. It was replaced by a small, bubbling upwelling of water, at first cloudy, then clearer and clearer, until a pool of pure, clean water shimmered in the basin. I cupped my hands and drank. It was the sweetest, coldest water I had ever tasted. It was the taste of victory. Using the newfound spring as my anchor, I began the real work. I took the moon petal sprout from my pocket and gently planted it in the damp earth at the water's edge. I fed it a sliver of my own energy, and it responded instantly, its leaves perking up, its roots digging eagerly into the revitalized soil. Then I walked the perimeter of my small oasis, my hands outstretched. I hummed the song of growth, not to a specific seed, but to the land itself, calling to whatever dormant life might still be sleeping deep within the cursed soil. For days, nothing happened. I survived on the pure water and the tiny, edible shoots I managed to coax from the dirt near the spring. I felt my hope beginning to fray. And then, one morning, I woke to a miracle. A faint green haze covered the ground in a perfect circle around the spring. Tiny, pale green shoots were pushing their way up through the ash. Life was answering my call. The first year was one of solitary, backbreaking work. I was not just a gardener, I was a creator, a terraformer. I used the song to break down the petrified wood of the dead trees, returning their ancient nutrients to the soil. I coaxed the newly sprouted grasses and mosses to spread, their roots breaking up the compacted ash and creating rich topsoil. My moon petal grew into a sprawling vine, producing luminous, silvery flowers that glowed softly in the perpetual twilight of the cinderwood, a beacon in the gray. From its seeds, I grew more. The plants that sprang from this soil, nurtured by my power, were extraordinary. The vegetables were vibrant and packed with flavor, the fruits so sweet they tasted of sunlight, though they had never seen it. I learned to use my connection to the earth to shape it. I found a small cave in a rocky outcrop and encouraged the stone to reshape itself, smoothing the walls, creating shelves, and forming a natural hearth. It became my home, warm and dry and safe. I was no longer just surviving, I was thriving, but I was alone. The first person arrived at the beginning of the second year. He was a young man, little more than a boy, with haunted eyes and a branded T on his cheek for thief. He had been exiled for stealing a loaf of bread for his starving family. He stumbled into my oasis, half dead from thirst, his eyes wide with disbelief at the sight of my lush, green sanctuary in the middle of the wasteland. He thought he was hallucinating, that it was a death mirage. I gave him water from my spring and a piece of fruit from my garden. He ate like a man possessed and wept with gratitude. He told me his name was Kale. He expected me to drive him away, to hoard my paradise for myself. Instead, I offered him a place to stay. He was the first citizen of my new world. Kale was followed by others. A family exiled for practicing an old religion. A woman cast out for bearing a child out of wedlock. A scholar whose radical ideas were deemed heretical. They were the outcasts, the forgotten, the unwanted refuse of the surrounding duchies and kingdoms. They would hear whispers and rumors of an impossible oasis in the heart of the Cinderwood, and, with nothing left to lose, would seek it out. Each person who arrived brought new skills. Kale was a brilliant carpenter. The family, the Jorans, were stonemasons. The scholar, Lyra, had a vast knowledge of engineering and history. We were a tribe of survivors, and my green sanctuary began to transform into a settlement. We named it Vidia. The years passed in a blur of creation. With my power guiding them, the Jorans learned to shape the living rock of the Cinderwood as if it were clay, raising elegant, sweeping structures that followed the natural contours of the land. Kale learned to weave the branches of the fast-growing ironwood trees I cultivated into homes that were both strong and beautiful. Lyra designed ingenious systems of aqueducts, carrying the pure water from my spring throughout our burgeoning town. My own power grew in concert with my kingdom. I was no longer just coaxing life from the soil. I was the beating heart of Vidia. I could feel the entire settlement, as if it were an extension of my own body, the flow of water in the pipes, the health of the crops in the fields, the structural integrity of every building. I taught those who had a sensitivity to the song, like Kale's youngest daughter, how to listen to the earth, to nurture the plants, and to practice small acts of healing. We weren't witches, we were caretakers. By the fifth year, Vidia was no longer a secret. Traders who had gotten lost in the wastes stumbled upon us and left with tales of a city of impossible beauty and abundance. They spoke of fruits that could heal sickness, of crystalline water, and of a serene, powerful woman they called the Green Queen. We began to trade our surplus, our remarkable crops, the rare minerals we now mined from the healed mountains, the beautiful goods our artisans crafted, and our little town grew into a small, prosperous city-state. All the while, I would hear news from the traders about my old home. The Duchy of Valoria was dying. The blight had never been eradicated. The crops failed year after year. The river had grown sluggish and toxic, and the people were sick and starving. Duke Valerius had levied crushing taxes to pay for grain from other kingdoms, but it was never enough. He was a lord of a poisoned, bankrupt land. Seraphina's betrothal to a powerful prince had been broken off. No one wanted to marry into a cursed and impoverished duchy. They were trapped in the ruin they had created, a ruin I could have prevented. I felt no pity, only a cold, distant sense of justice. The inevitable confrontation came in the autumn of the 7th year. A formal delegation from Valoria arrived at the borders of Vidia, which were no longer gray ash, but lush, managed forests. They were led by 3 figures I recognized even from a distance: my father, Duke Valerius, my stepmother, Isolde, and my stepsister, Seraphina. They looked thin, worn. Their fine clothes were threadbare, their faces etched with desperation. They had not come to conquer, they had come to beg. I had my guards lead them through the city. I wanted them to see everything. I wanted the vibrant health of my people, the impossible bounty of our fields, and the breathtaking beauty of our architecture to be seared into their minds. They walked with their mouths agape, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe and avarice. They were led to the grand hall of Vidia, a chamber not of cold stone and oppressive oak like my father's, but of living silver wood, its walls interwoven with my glowing moonpetal vines. The ceiling a high dome of naturally formed crystal that refracted the light into 1,000 rainbows. I sat on a simple throne carved from a single piece of heartwood, adorned not with gold or jewels, but with living flowers. I was not the timid, dirt-streaked girl they had cast out. I wore a gown of woven milkweed silk, the color of new leaves, and my hair was bound with a circlet of silver and moonpetal blossoms. At my side stood Kale, the former thief, now the captain of my guard, and Lyra, the heretical scholar, my most trusted advisor. When they were brought before me, they didn't recognize me at first. They saw only the Green Queen of the legends. My father, with the practiced air of a life spent groveling to those more powerful than him, began his plea. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice raspy, "I am Duke Valerius of Valoria. We have come seeking aid. Our lands are barren. Our people starve. We have heard tales of your bounty, and we throw ourselves upon your mercy." I let the silence hang in the air, watching them. I saw the moment recognition dawned on Seraphina's face. Her skin went pale, her eyes widening in horror and disbelief. Isolde saw it next, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a gasp. Finally, my father's gaze focused on my face, and the blood drained from his. He looked as if he had seen a ghost. "Elara?" he whispered, the name a ragged, choked sound. I rose from my throne. "That name was taken from me, in this very season, 7 years ago," I said, my voice calm and clear, echoing in the vast hall. "You called me a witch and condemned me to die in the wasteland you see around you." I began to walk slowly towards them, my every step measured and deliberate. "You, father, stood by and signed my death warrant to quell a panic I could have ended. You, Isolde, whispered poison in his ear, all to elevate your own child. And you, Seraphina." I stopped directly in front of her, She flinched as if I had struck her. You lied. You bore false witness against your own sister, condemning her to death so you wouldn't have to share the light. You are the architects of your own misery. I turned from them and addressed the entire hall, my voice ringing with power. They accused me of causing the blight that ravaged their lands. The truth is, I offered them the cure. A cure I discovered using the very witchcraft they so feared. This gift, this song of the earth, is not a curse. It is the power of life itself. The power I used to turn the Cinderwood into Vidia. Everything you see here, the food, the water, the homes, the hope, was built with the magic you threw away. The humiliation on their faces was a sight to behold. It was more satisfying than any curse or physical blow. They were standing in the living proof of their own catastrophic stupidity. You come to me for aid, I continued, returning to my throne, and aid you shall have. The people of Valoria do not deserve to starve because of the ignorance of their leaders. My words offered a sliver of hope, and my father's eyes lit up with desperate relief. But I was not finished. But it comes at a price. My mercy is for the people, not for you. Valoria will become a protectorate of Vidia. Its lands and its people will fall under my care and my law. You, Valerius, will publicly abdicate your title. You will stand before your people and confess to the injustice you did to me, and you will name me as your rightful successor, the new protector of the duchy. My gaze shifted to the two women who had made my life a living hell. You, Isolde, and you, Seraphina, will be stripped of all titles and lands. You coveted a life of ease and luxury, so you will learn the value of labor. You will work the fields of Valoria alongside the common folk. You will feel the soil in your hands and learn what it is to nurture life instead of seeking only to choke it. Seraphina let out a horrified sob. You can't do this. I can, I said, my voice as cold and hard as stone. These are my terms. Accept them, and your people will eat tomorrow. Refuse, and you can return to your dying lands and explain to your starving subjects why you chose your pride over their lives. My father, broken and defeated, sank to his knees. There was no choice. To refuse was to condemn everyone, including himself, to death. His power, his pride, his name, it was all dust. We accept, he rasped, his head bowed to the floor. We accept. In the weeks that followed, my terms were met to the letter. Viridian wagons, laden with food, medicine, and clean water, rolled into Valoria, greeted by cheering crowds. My father stood on the balcony of his own castle and, in a trembling voice, confessed his crimes against me and ceded all authority to the Green Queen of Vidia. He was a hollowed-out man, a ghost haunting the halls of his former power, eventually retiring to a small, forgotten estate where he would live out his days in obscurity. Isolde and Seraphina's fate was, to me, the most fitting justice. I watched from that same balcony as they were given simple linen shifts and led to the very fields they had once surveyed with disdain. Their soft hands, once used for embroidery and pouring poisoned words into my father's ear, were now calloused and stained with the dirt they had once taught me to be ashamed of. They were bitter, broken women. Their schemes and ambitions turned to ash, forced every single day to witness the land heal and the people flourish under the rule of the witch they had tried to destroy. Their prison was not one of bars, but one of perpetual impotent regret. My reign marked a new beginning for both lands. I used the song to cleanse the toxic river of Valoria, and with Viridia's aid, we replanted the fields. The blight that had plagued them for 7 years vanished within a single season. The two realms, one born of ash and the other reborn from it, were woven together. Vidia, with its innovation and vibrant spirit, and Valoria, with its old traditions and grateful people, became one kingdom, stronger and more prosperous than either could have been alone. I found a new family among the people I had welcomed into my sanctuary. Kale remained my loyal captain, Lyra my wisest counsel. I found love not with a prince or a duke, but with a gentle stonemason who saw the woman behind the queen, one who loved the scent of the earth as much as I did. We had children, and I taught them the song, not as a secret to be hidden, but as a gift to be celebrated. Sometimes I would stand on the highest tower of my palace in Vidia, and look out over my kingdom. The Cinderwood was no more. In its place was a sprawling, verdant forest and a city that glowed with life. The air was sweet, filled with the scent of moon petal and the sound of laughter. I had been called a witch, an outcast, a monster. I had been given a death sentence. But from the ashes of their hatred, I had built a paradise. My victory wasn't just in their downfall, but in the vibrant, thriving life that had risen from my deepest pain. The song of the earth was no longer a solitary whisper. It was a symphony, and I was its conductor. And it was beautiful.